I think maybe the midterm elections are an opportunity for the nation collectively to think about what our future holds. And of course, people within the administration and people within the halls of Congress are thinking about where the new focus will be. Of course, the democratically controlled House next year will be making much of investigations into the president and into various issues. And so maybe this is an opportunity that Attorney General Sessions thought now is my time to leave this office. And of course, as President Trump tweeted, we'll see who the next leader to take the Attorney General's office will be. But my hope is that this doesn't get in the way of policy making, that even Democrats, as they control the House, will continue to focus on issues that are of importance to American households and families, and to not simply make this about, a contest with President Trump.
Scott, your thoughts?
Well, obviously, Mr. Trump has had a very tough relationship with the Attorney General. But, you often see after a midterm election, especially one as contentious as this, where you do see a lot of turnover within administration, new blood coming in, old blood leaving because they're simply burned out or tired. And so it'll be interesting to see if this is the first of many changes within the administration.
I want to go to Blake Berman. He's at the White House, and he's got an update on this breaking news. Blake Berman. Blake?
At 8:52 this morning, Charles, I looked at one of my colleagues here at the White House, and I said, I'm surprised we don't have the resignation of Jeff Sessions yet. Here we are at 2:50 in the afternoon, and it has come. For all we know, Jeff Sessions could have resigned earlier this morning. What we do know is that Jeff Sessions is no longer the Attorney General of the United States. He says in a letter that was written to the president, quote, at your request, I am submitting my resignation. He ends that letter by saying, thank you for the opportunity, Mr. President. In the middle of it all, Sessions lays out some of his accomplishments that he feels he accomplished as his time as Attorney General, among them supporting law enforcement, opioids, et cetera, on down the line. This was no surprise whatsoever to anyone who has followed this White House closely, Charles. It was just a matter of timing. In fact, the president was asked in generalities about his cabinet shakeup during that sprawling news conference that we just heard from him this afternoon, and he said essentially that they are going to come. Don't be surprised when they happen. People are working long and hard, and these are kinds of things that work their way through the administration. But I think Jeff Sessions was in an entirely different bucket, as the president was never thrilled with him once Sessions decided to remove himself from the special counsel investigation overseeing that when he recused himself on the early days of his job. The president said if he had known that, he would have appointed someone else. Again, it was just a matter of when, not if, and now we know the when. It is today is the last day for Jeff Sessions, Charles.
Blake Berman, thank you very much. Hadley, I want to go back to you on this because there are a lot of implications here, of course, for who the replacement would be. Also, there are going to be a lot of questions asked, as they were in the press conference, about the Mueller investigation. How much of that are you concerned about interfering with all the economic progress that you tout and that you've been talking about from the very beginning?
Well, it's interesting, Charles, that the economy, while it is booming, and we talk frequently on your show about all the indicators that support that point, it wasn't the number one issue in this midterm election. It wasn't the number one issue that voters said motivated them to go to the polls. In fact, a plurality of voters cited health care as their top concern. Among the top concerns that voters pointed to, whether it was health care, the economy, immigration, and so forth, you didn't see a lot of voters citing, concerns about corruption in our government or the Mueller investigation. These things were not at the top of voters' minds when they were voting. However, giving control to Democrats may be, a reason that we see these investigations, at least in the short run in the House, hype up, and we see more of them in the news. Of course, Democrats will be pursuing every opportunity to make President Trump look bad, especially as now, I'm sure the American people are exhausted with this, but today is day one of the presidential race for 2020. Unfortunately, our never-ending campaign cycle works that way, but that's what I think we should expect to see from Democrats in the House now.
Scott, it's early to know who may be the permanent replacement, but again, this was evidently going to happen to the point made here by Hadley and Blake. So there must be some sort of game plan in place. Should the White House be bracing for the confrontation that was hyped prior to this? Because President Trump saying, listen, this could be a tit-for-tat war, and I'm sure the American public probably doesn't want to see that.
Well, Charles, remember, it looks as though Republicans are gaining seats in the Senate. So what was a very contentious vote over the Kavanaugh nomination could be much less contentious with the new Attorney General nomination. If the Republicans have a pretty clear advantage in the Senate, then some of those marginal or very powerful senators, such as Susan Collins and Murkowski, who had a big say in the Kavanaugh hearing, they will have less power over their single vote when it comes to the Attorney General. So it gives the White House, I think, a lot more flexibility, and it also obviously gets Mitch McConnell a lot more ease in trying to push forward the new nominee.
We have Misty Maris, attorney, on the phone with us now. Misty, again, everyone's saying this isn't news per se, but it has landed like it's landed with some ferocity here. The market has stalled the rally, and now people are scratching their heads and wondering what's next for this White House. Who might the next Attorney General be?
Well, there's been some possible successors that have been named, and that includes retired federal appeals judge Janet Rogers, Transportation Department counsel Stephen Bradbury. There's about 5 names that have been floated around. Secretary of State John Sullivan and Bill Barr, who served as Attorney General under President George H.W. Bush. So there are certainly some names. There are some people in the hopper. Not the biggest surprise that we see this relationship coming to a close.
Misty, it's a resignation letter, but it seems apparent that Jeff Sessions was fired. He does mention at your request he's submitting his resignation. Does that change the dynamics of this at all, or is this again something that was played out in the public and perhaps a long time coming?
Yeah, it was played out in the public and a long time coming. And one thing that we all have to remember is that these folks work at the pleasure of the president. So certainly if there is a contentious relationship, that is ultimately the president's choice to make that decision whether or not the person will be effective in the role. And that's what the president's looking out for, right? He wants someone to be effective in the role that he can work with, that's going to do right for the American people. And if Jeff Sessions isn't that person, that is what Donald Trump has to do. We just happen to get a little bit more of the inside scoop and watch this play out over time, ultimately culminating in this event.
By the way, I want to let the audience know that Governor Scott Walker has just conceded defeat in his race. Misty, I do want to ask, though, when you say effective in his role, one of the things that observers have said is that President Trump at times treated the Attorney General as his own personal attorney, and that there are distinct differences in responsibilities, that the Attorney General ultimately, while he serves at the pleasure of the president, works for the American public.
Well, that's absolutely true. And you are right, Charles, that he certainly is not a personal attorney for the president. However, in the same token, you do need somebody that they can be effectively working together. So whether or not Donald Trump crossed those lines, that is not appropriate. Of course, he works for the American public as the Attorney General. But to the extent that Jeff Sessions was removed or was ultimately asked to resign from that position, it's certainly something that the president has the power to do.
Misty, sources are telling Fox News that Matt Whitaker, now the acting Attorney General, will take over the rest of the investigation. Can you read anything into that?
Well, I think that what we're going to see, I think we're going to see the investigation continue on. I don't think we're going to see too much of a hitch. Of course, he will now be the one that's calling the shots and making those decisions. But I would be surprised if we saw too much of a disruption at the stage that we're at right now.
Hold on for 1 second for me, Misty, and I want to ask our economic experts about this as well. Hadley, I'll start with you. If there's any interruption in this Russian investigation, we know it makes for bad headlines. We've got to believe that we're near some sort of conclusion. Would there be an economic impact? Certainly, I would think there would be a knee-jerk reaction by the stock market.
I agree with you, Charles. I think we are always most likely to see investors responding to the news of the day in the stock market. However, when it comes to the foundational indicators in our economy, the fact that our labor markets are so strong, that wages and benefits are increasing at a faster rate than in the past 10 years, that consumer confidence is at an 18-year high, I think the foundation of our economy is so strong that any interruption here would not place those critical elements of our economy in jeopardy. However, we might see, as you mentioned, a knee-jerk reaction, at least in the